On day 20, we'll be looking around the eastern part of Massachusetts. We'll be doing this part of our trip. We'll leave West Warwick, go to Lizzy Borden House, the Bedford Whaling Museum, go out on Cape Cod to Cape Cod National Seashore, and end up at Providencetown for the night.
Use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto Rhode Island 401 East.
Soon we're leaving Rhode Island and crossing back into Massachusetts. We'll be here for several more days. Our first stop will be Fall Rivers, where on August the 4th, 1892, Lizzy Borden's parents were murdered. First, we'll be visiting Oak Grove Cemetery and looking at the graves of the Borden family. One of these in here. They're all buried in one part of the cemetery. And as we look at the graves, we need to remember that Andrew and Abby Borden were buried headless. Their heads were taken off as evidence and later buried in the same grave, but a few feet above their bodies. And this is Lizzy's grave. She changed her name to Elizabeth later. And this is her older sister, Emma. And now it's time to head to the house. We have a tour scheduled. The house where the murders took place is a bed and breakfast. You can stay here if you want to. It seems to stay pretty booked up. The parking lot was full when we arrived, and so we had to wait to find a place to park. And now it's time to head inside and go on our tour. I'll let the guide speak.
Welcome to Lizzy Borden's, the Lizzy Borden House, home of the famous unsolved axe murders that happened on August 4th, 1892. Do I have any Lizzy aficionados here? Anybody?
She's my fifth cousin. Was my fifth cousin.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, my name is Suzanne St. John, and don't worry, you're all going to be experts by the time we're done. My name is Suzanne St. John. It's my honor to be your welder today and take you back in time a little bit. As we go through the house, yes, you can take as many pictures as you like. He had it built as a 2-family house. So he used to live in the second floor apartment and he rented out the first. That all changes in 1872 when Mr. Borden buys it for $10,000 and turns it into a single family. Now, he bought it in the downtown area here because this is where his businesses were, right? So he could just walk right downtown, collect his money, collect his rent, go to Dunkin' Donuts, come back to the house. But the girls, and by girls I mean Lizzy and Emma, always resented living here. This was a poor Irish working class neighborhood, not where they belonged. They belonged up on the hill or the highlands of Fall River where society lived, not downtown. Now, when Mr. Borden bought the house, something that you'll notice when we go up to where they made the bedrooms on the second floor, there's no hallways. So what that means is that if you wanted to go to your bedroom, you would walk to her bedroom, she would walk to her bedroom. Kind of takes the privacy issue and it tosses it out the door, doesn't it? But I'll show you how they rectified that the best they could when we go upstairs. Now, also when Mr. Borden bought the house, there was no gas lighting in the house. There was gas lighting available at the time, but he chose not to put it in. They had kerosene lamps like that one on the table. Sometimes he didn't even want to waste kerosene, so they would sit around in the dark at night. There was no indoor plumbing in the house. There was indoor plumbing available, but he chose not to put it in. They had an outhouse in the barn, a 2-stall privy in the basement, and everybody had their chamber pot by the side of the bed that Mr. Borden would collect in the morning and throw up against the pear trees in the yard. We still have 2 pear trees, so if you guys come back during the summer and tempted to grab a pear, just remember I said that.
I don't want pears anymore.
What's that?
You don't want a pear.
Might get some poopy pears. The only creature comfort he provided was he put in the radiators. He did a beautiful job at that. They still work great to this day. You'll see those on the 1st and 2nd floor. Now, the people we have living here at the time are Andrew Borden. Mr. Borden, he was 69 years old. We have Abby Borden. Abby was 64 years old. Now, Abby was the 2nd Mrs. Borden. The 1st Mrs. Borden died when Lizzie was 2.5 years old and Emma was 12. 2 years later, he marries Abby Durfee Gray. So Abby was their stepmother. We have our older sister, Emma. Emma was 41 years old at the time, and a little unusual, she wasn't here. During her entire adult life, she never went away for longer than one night. She was gone for 2 weeks before the murders. Then 9 years younger, we have Lizzie. Lizzie was 32 years old at the time, and we know she was here, right? Then we have our maid, Bridget Sullivan. Now, Bridget had been the Borden's maid for almost 3 years, 2 years and 9 months. But if you do any reading or see any movies or listen to podcasts, she's also referred to as something else, but only by Lizzie and Emma. Who knows what they called her?
Maggie?
Maggie! We do have an expert. Yes. Well, why the heck did they call her Maggie if her name was Bridget? Well, because their previous maid's name was Maggie, and they couldn't be bothered to learn another maid's name.
Oh my God.
A little disrespectful. Then the night before the murders, we had an unexpected visitor, Uncle John Vinicum Morris. Now, Uncle John was the 1st Mrs. Borden's brother, so he was the natural uncle of Lizzie and Emma. He was from Fall River, but moved out to Hastings, Iowa, but would come back and forth to visit with family and check on his businesses. He was staying on an extended visit, staying at a friend's farm right around the corner in Dartmouth, Mass. But he shows up the night before the murders, totally unannounced, without luggage or even a toothbrush. So they put him upstairs in the guest room. Now, if you drive around Fall River, you see the Borden name a lot, right? Did that come up on your GPS over here as Borden Street?
Borden Street.
Guess what? Not necessarily named after these Bordens. The 1892 census tells us that there was 129 heads of household with the last name Borden running around Fall River. Wow. So a lot of Bordens running around, wealthy side, not so wealthy side. Andrew belonged to the not so wealthy side. He made his fortune on his own. He started out as a carpenter. Guess what? He did some of the woodwork on this house for Charles Trafton. All of the woodwork is original, right down to some of the doorknobs. So if you touch that doorknob, it's the same doorknob Lizzie Borden touched. You might go home and be haunted. Hopefully not. Just sanitize your hands with it. That's how you get rid of the haunts. He also used to own a store with his friend William Almy, another carpenter. It was called William Borden and Almy's Furniture and Feathers. What do you think they sold there?
Furniture and feathers.
Close. Furniture and
Chicken?
Mattresses.
coffins.
Oh.
What?
Yes. Some people say, oh, Andrew was an undertaker. In one of the old movies it shows him down in the basement and he's doing undertaking.
Oh.
Well, guess what? He wasn't an undertaker. That's what they used to call people that just made the coffins back then. So he didn't do any undertaking or anything like that.
So he made coffins in his basement?
No, at his store. Yeah. No, it didn't make coffins. But I'll show you something when we go up to the 3rd floor that they say is part of a coffin, so we'll see. But where he really made his money was in real estate and banking. He was president and chairman of the board of 3 different banks, right over here downtown, and he also owned a lot of real estate. Now, as you drive through Fall River, you see our big textile mills, right? Those big brick buildings. Fall River at the turn of the century was the largest textile mill city in the United States. There was over 111 of them back then. He owned 2. He also owned a lot of the apartments or tenements that the mill workers lived in. How that was not a benefit is if you worked in one of his mills and you got a 25-cent a month raise and you also lived in one of his apartments, what do you think happened?
You get a 25-cent increase in
Your rent went up 25 cents. So not the most liked gentleman out there. At the time of his death, he was worth $350,000. What do you think that is equal to today?
Millions, probably.
10 to $12 million. And we're sitting around in the dark with no potties. So a lot of money then, a lot of money now. Now this room does hold historical significance to the case. The murders happened on a Thursday. On Saturday morning, Mayor Coughlin and Marshall Hilliard, pictured on the wall, gathered Lizzy and Emma and Uncle John in this room and said, nobody's allowed to leave the area while we're doing our investigations. Lizzy says, oh, do you have anybody you suspect yet? He said, yes, Lizzy, we suspect you. First time she heard it, Uncle John and Emma knew that they suspected Lizzy, but they didn't tell her. So they took her down to the Far River Central Jail. This building was right around the corner, right where Webster's Bank is now, of course, no longer standing. That's where the coroner's inquest was held for 3 days. This is where they found Lizzy to be probably guilty. They felt they had probable cause to arrest her. They arrest Lizzy on 3 charges: murder of Andrew, murder of Abby, and murder of both. So they took her to the Taunton jail. Taunton's about 10 miles from here, basically because there was a woman matron there to look over Lizzy during her 10 months of incarceration. She didn't have it all that bad, though. They did have gas lighting, they had indoor plumbing, and they ordered out to the local restaurants for her food. Her lunch pail was at the Fall River Historical Society. She gained 25 pounds as she awaited her trial. She's like living the Vida Loca. That's a picture of the grand jury that was held in New Bedford, about 12 miles from here. What can you tell me is different about the jury?
Man.
Oh, men! Women did not have the right to vote, so they didn't serve on juries, which was a big benefit to Lizzy, of course, because a man couldn't picture a woman doing something like that. Certainly it had to be a crazed fiend, right? They listened to 13 days of testimony. They deliberated only a few minutes. But out of respect for the court and Mr. Borden, they waited a full hour, hour and a half before they went back and said not guilty. Lizzy was acquitted. She was set free. Then they went and they took that picture of themselves, which they presented to Lizzy a few weeks later. Like, wow. Who does that? Can you imagine like OJ's jury saying, hey!
Our guide told us that when Abby's sister was being evicted, that Andrew bought the house and gave it to Abby, and the girls thought they were being cut out of the will.
Fruit, coffee, and cookies. Now, has anybody heard that the autopsies were done in this house?
No. Yes, actually.
Yeah, right here. Not on that table, that would be gross. On coroner's boards like the ones behind me. They brought Abby downstairs, moved the table over, they shaved the back of her head, you can pass that way, and they removed her stomach. This is a picture of Andrew in the sitting room next door. You can see the sitting board beneath him. This is his face and where they removed his stomach. You can pass that way. So they removed both of their stomachs and sent them to Boston to be analyzed looking for poison. Now what the grand jury did not hear is that the day before the murders on Wednesday morning, Lizzy goes walking down around the corner into Eli Bentz's pharmacy, Smith's Drugs. She asks him to buy 10 cents worth of prussic acid. Now, prussic acid is hydrogen cyanide, a highly deadly poison. You could die just from inhaling it. He said, Lizzy, I can't sell you this without a doctor's prescription. What do you want it for? She said, oh, I want to clean moths off of my sealskin cape. Like we all do, right? And I clean our sealskin capes in August. He says, I can't sell that to you without a doctor's prescription. What do you want it for? She said, oh, what do you want to clean the sealskin capes? He said, well, I can't sell it to you without a doctor's prescription. She said, I've bought it before. He said, not for me, my dear. So he testifies along with 2 witnesses that saw Lizzy go in to attempt to buy this poison. But the grand jury judge throws it out as inadmissible. Why? Because when the reports came back from Boston, there was no poison found, so it was irrelevant. And he said it happened too remotely from the time of the murders. It happened the day before! Jury never heard it. Now, the morning of the murders, Andrew comes home a little early that day. He's still feeling unwell from Tuesday. Normally, he would come home a little bit closer to the noonday meal. But this day, he comes home at about 20 to 11. He's got the mail in his hands because he just went to the post office. Lizzy follows close behind him and says, any mail for me, Father? He says, no, Lizzy, none for you. Where is your mother? Oh, she received a note to go out to visit a sick friend. Andrew says, okay. He walks over to the mantle. He grabs this key. We'll talk about that later. He goes up to the 2nd floor to his bedroom. He comes back down a few minutes later, and he sits on the sofa. He tells Lizzy he's going to take a nap before the noonday meal. Lizzy said she saw her father remove his shoes so he would be more comfortable for his nap. Take a look at the crime scene photo. Tell me what he has on his feet.
Shoes.
Oops, got shoes on. There was a couple discrepancies during the trial. That was just one. Another one was when Lizzy was asked, what were you doing at 11 o'clock? Oh, I wasn't even in the house. I went out to the barn. I went up to the loft. I was there 20 to 30 minutes. I ate 3 pears and I was looking for lead to make sinkers because I was going fishing in Marion, Mass on Monday. Okay, she was known to be an angler. Then a few minutes later, Lizzy, what were you doing when your father's being murdered? Oh, I wasn't even in the house. I went out to the barn. I went up to the loft. I was there 20 to 30 minutes. I ate 3 pears, but this time she says she was looking for tin to fix one of the screens on one of the windows that was broken. Now, why is Lizzy Borden fixing screens? Not her job. They never found a screen that was broken. The first officer on duty went up to the loft at eye level. He said there was a very thick layer of dust that had been undisturbed. Lizzy said she walked through the kitchen, through the dining room, and then into the sitting room to check on her father, who was napping. She finds he's been hit 10 to 11 times.
You're dead.
Completely chopping off his nose and severing his eye socket and yelling up the back stairway. Maggie, Maggie, come down quickly. Somebody's hurt father. So Bridget comes running down the stairs. Lizzy says, go get Dr. Bowen. So she runs across the street to get Dr. Bowen, but he's not home, so she comes back. Lizzy says, go get Alice Russell. Now, Alice is Lizzy and Emma's best friend that lives around the corner on Borden Street. So she goes running down to go get Alice to come back to comfort Lizzy. Now, our nosy neighbor, not you, the one in the frame, Mrs. Churchill, she literally lives right on the other side of the driveway. She's like the neighborhood busybody, you know, the one that's always peeking out her windows. Yeah, we still have them. And she sees Bridget running all over, and then she sees Lizzy standing in the back doorway and says, Lizzy, what's happening? And Lizzy says, oh, Mrs. Churchill, somebody's murdered father, do come. So now Mrs. Churchill is here. A couple of their neighbors have gathered. Another doctor has arrived. Now, if you're going to murder somebody in Fall River, probably the best day you could have chose to have done it would have been on August 4th, 1892. Anybody know why? Our entire police force was in Rocky Point Park, Rhode Island at their annual clam bake.
Oh.
Now remember, there was no Braga Bridge back then, so you had to take a train or a steamer across, right? So there was only a couple officers, now they were here. One of them says to Lizzy, Lizzy, where is your mother? Oh, she received a note to go out to visit a sick friend, but I do think I heard her come home. Maggie, will you go upstairs and look? And Bridget's like, I'm not going upstairs by myself. There's a dead body right here. But Mrs. Churchill, Mrs. Busybody, says she'll go up with Bridget. So they start to walk up the stairs. They get about up to the 7th or 8th step, and they can clearly see Abby lying in a pool of her blood on the other side of the bed. They just run back downstairs and say, there's been another. So come on upstairs. Make sure you look to the left.
Another.
Now this is the most requested room at the bed and breakfast. This is the John Morse room, the guest room, or AKA the murder room. That's a picture of Uncle John in between the 2 windows. He looks like the love child of Will Ferrell and Abraham Lincoln. He does. He's the one who slept up here that night. At about 9:30, Abby comes up to make up the guest room. Now, why is Abby making up the guest room and not her maid Bridget? Well, back then, maids were not allowed in the sleeping quarters of the houses. They were Irish. They might steal something. So Bridget never came to the 2nd floor. And during her almost 3 years of employment, it said she tried to quit 3 times. But Abby would beg her to stay. Please don't leave me alone with Lizzy and Emma. And it said she actually took a little extra money out of her pocket to give to Bridget to stay. Now, Bridget also made $4 a week salary. Remember that number. So Abby was up here at about 9:30 putting on the dust covers. Her attacker comes at her this way. We think she was hit first on the left side of the face. She spins around, falls to the ground. Her attacker straddles her and hits her 17 more times in the back of the head and 1 more time in the center of the neck, severing her spinal cord. Little anger? Little bit. Now keep in mind, back then there was no such thing as DNA. There was no such thing as even fingerprinting yet. So how you kind of figured out what happened is how you found the crime scene. But the crime scene was getting tainted and moved left and right, moving the body, moving the furniture. Here's a picture of Abby. It looks like she's doing downward dog. She's not. But when she went down, her legs were outside of her skirt. So a doctor took her legs, shoved them up inside her skirt, and built her skirt around her feet. So you wouldn't be offended should you see an ankle. Forget she doesn't have a head. I guess that's not offensive at all. Here's Abby lying right here. You can see how accurate the furniture is. The photographer's camera that was right there. This was the very first crime scene photographed in the United States.
Wow.
There was another one in London, and you guys know who that was.
Sherlock Holmes.
Jack the Ripper. This is the first one here. Now, 2 reasons we know Abby died first. Number 1, when the stomach reports came back from Boston, even though her and Andrew had breakfast together, her stomach was not as digested as Andrew's was by about an hour, hour and a half. How they determined that is they weighed the stomachs. And her blood had already started to skin over or coagulate, whereas Andrew was downstairs still running warm and wet. So again, about an hour, hour and a half. Now, Uncle John, as we know, left the house first. He goes to visit family on Wade Bassett Street right here in Fall River, only less than a mile from here. But he chose to take the trolley home for the noonday meal. It drops him off on the corner and he starts to walk up 2nd Street. Now at this point, word is spreading that there's been a double murder at the Bordens. The mills are spilling out with the news. There is literally 200 to 2,000 people outside this house. Now, when the Bordens bought this house, this was originally Emma's room because the oldest daughter gets the biggest room, right? And that little room was Lizzie's. That all changes when Lizzy turns 30 years old. She goes on a grand tour of Europe for 19 weeks. Wow. And she bought so many souvenirs and trinkets, she couldn't fit them in her tiny room. So she asked Emma to swap rooms with her, and evidently Emma said yes, because at the time of the murders, this was Lizzie's room, and that was Emma's. Now, I said that all the rooms, there's no hallways, right? All the rooms are connected. So what Andrew and Abby did is they basically cut the house in half. They nailed their door shut and put a big desk up against it so you couldn't push through. Lizzy puts a hook and eye on her side, and she catty corners her bed this way. So now the only way to get to the front 3 rooms is through the front stairway. The only way to get to the back bedroom of the 3rd floor is through the servants' stairway in the back. So remember when Andrew came upstairs briefly that morning before he was killed? He had no way of knowing his wife lay dead on the other side of that door because he never came up the front stairs. So doesn't it make sense when you see the layout of the house? So you get both rooms. Now, when the Bordens bought this house, this was originally Charles Trafton's kitchen. And you can still see the flue from the stove behind the bed. But the Bordens made it into their master bedroom. That room obviously was not a bathroom. That was Andrew's dressing closet. That room right there was Abby's dress closet. She had her dresses in there. Andrew had another desk, a file cabinet, and a safe. Now, about a year before the murders, there was a break-in in this house in broad daylight. There was people home, Lizzy, Emma, and Bridget. Somebody walked through that door, walked into Abby's closet, and only steals Abby's stuff. Her money, her jewelry, and her trolley tickets.
Wow.
Trolley tickets.
So Andrew starts this big investigation, but shortly after, it's abruptly shut off. Why? Because a young boy was trying to get on a trolley. He hands the conductor the ticket. They noticed it was one of the numbers that was stolen from Abby Borden. They said, "Son, where did you get this ticket?" He said, "Oh, Miss Lizzy gave it to me." So Andrew knew it was an inside job. Remember the key down on the mantelpiece? Yes. He put that there to taunt Lizzy. He said, if anybody breaks into my room again, I know it was you, because you know what this key is too. Anybody else would first of all have to find the key and then figure out where it goes, right? Yeah. After Lizzy is acquitted and set free, kind of goes off the radar. We don't know what happened to her. We don't know if she went back to Ireland. We don't know if she stayed in the States to take care of another family for about 5 years. Then all of a sudden she shows up in Anaconda, Montana, and she buys a horse farm.
Wow.
Now how does a man making $4 a week buy a horse farm? Was she paid off? Did she win Irish Mega Millions? No. We don't know. She did eventually marry somebody named John Sullivan. Same last name, didn't have to change her embroidery. And her kind of looking like Mrs. Doubtfire. She dies in 1947 at about the age of 82 years old. Alice Russell. Do you remember our best friend Alice? She had been staying with the girls up in Andrew and Abby's room. And she leaves the house, she goes out that back door, and she goes to her house on Borden Street, and then she comes back in. Good luck?
She doesn't want me to come in.
She comes in that door, and she sees Lizzy standing right where I'm standing right here. Lizzy walks over to the coal closet and she takes out a dress. She starts ripping up this dress and throwing the dress into the fire. Alice said, Lizzy, what are you doing? Lizzy said, this whole thing is ruined. I brushed up against some brown paint and now I can't wear it. And then, so tear, into the fire the dress goes. It's gone. Alice said, Lizzy, that's the worst thing you ever could have done. You know that they were looking for a dress. Lizzy says, oh, why did you let me do it then? Dress is gone. Alice was a witness for the prosecution. She told what she had seen, and she never speaks with Lizzy or Emma again. Now, time of death is important in this case, because if it was shown that Andrew died first, the inheritance would have went to Abby, but Abby was deceased, so it would have went out to Abby's side of the family, totally bypassing the girls. So it was important to show that Abby died first, because then the inheritance goes to Andrew, but he was deceased. So where does it go? Lizzy.
The investigators found a handleless axe head in the basement. It had blood on it and hair, and they thought it might be the murder weapon. But when investigated, found out it was cow hair and not human blood.
So this is where Bridget would wash their clothes, or the Bordens would wash their clothes, and it's also where it was said that Andrew would slaughter the animals for dinner. Now, what I want you to do, who's got their flash on?
Okay.
Come on over here. I'm going to have you stand right here, and I want you to take a picture.
Some people say they can see a face here. Can you?
Come on, we're hiding ankles upstairs. She's not running around in the bus.
Exactly.
But what I think happened is somebody put on that big coat and backwards committed the murders. There's all your blood splatter, and they put it under Andrew's head.
Yeah.
I personally think Lizzy did Abby, but I think Uncle John did Andrew.
And now it's time to head New Bedford and look at the whaling exhibits there.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Elm Street.
New Bedford National Whaling Museum. We're going to be visiting the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. It's an area downtown, not a park as we normally think of it, but a group of historical buildings that are now being used for other things such as law offices and other such offices, but they are of historical significance. We'll visit the Visitor Center first. This place is still being used as a fishing place. At the height of the whaling times, there were hundreds of ships stationed here. One of the historical buildings houses the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and we're going to be looking inside there a whole lot. It's a rather large building with several stories to look at. As we enter the building, there are several giant whale skeletons hanging from the ceiling, and over there, that's the heart from a blue whale. We look at a chart of all the different whales and dolphins and porpoises, and here's some anatomy pictures of the various whales. Many of the sea captains and other people involved in the whaling expeditions became extremely wealthy during this time period, and these are some of the furnishings from some of their homes. Voyages usually lasted 3 to 4 years, and you would get a percentage of the profits off the ship as your pay, depending upon your skill level and your position on the ship. Spermaceti came from the heads of the sperm whales, and these are some of their teeth. They also have a full-size ship, the whaling ship Lagoda from New Bedford, in their museum, so you can take tours of it. This is a cutaway of what the ship would have looked like. On the bottom, they would have stored the oil in barrels, and on top is where they had the vats for rendering the whale blubber into oil. These are some of what the vats might have looked like on board the ships, and these are some that were actually used on the ship. They would carry anywhere from 4 to 6 of these whaling boats that would be launched could chase down the sperm whales and other whales. They would harpoon them and let them drag the ship until they were tired, and then use lances to kill them. It was all done by manpower. Today they use gunpowder to fire the harpoons. Now it's time to head out on Cape Cod to our final destination for the day. There's a national seashore here in this area, and this is what Cape Cod looks like. And we'll be driving out to the very end to Providencetown, where we'll spend the night looking at the park along the way. Now we're turning on to part of the Cape Cod National Seashore, and we'll stop at the Visitor Center for a few minutes before heading on down to the beach. Here we find the Nauset Lighthouse. This is the Nauset Lighthouse beach that we'll be looking at. We won't walk down to it because it's down a cliff, but we will look over the beach for a few minutes. In the water there are several harbor seals playing around, looking for food and just as we leave, we get a better look at the lighthouse, which is under renovations at this time. There are hundreds of these along the seashore to keep ships from hitting it. Now we're heading out to drive down the entire length all the way to the end to Providencetown, Massachusetts. Providencetown is where the Pilgrims originally landed on the Mayflower. They stayed here for several days until they decided what to do, and then moved permanently to the Plymouth site from here, since it was better protected. And now we're arriving in Providencetown. You can see how much sand there is around the area. This is Providencetown, where we'll be spending the night. We'll be staying in the Surfside Hotel and Suites circled on the right hand of this map. But first we're going to look around the town some. A tower has been built here to remind people that this is the first place that the Pilgrims landed, and we'll stop and look at it a little bit.
That's Pilgrim's Tower. Our full family father's tower was on the outside.
Next we drive back to our hotel, where we're going to settle in for a little bit and then go out to eat. We'll be staying on the ocean view side of the Surfside Hotel and Suites near the water, so we can have a good look from our balcony out over the water, over to the shore, and this is what it's going to look like in the evening. We'll be eating at the Lobster Pot, and then after that looking around downtown just a little bit before heading back to our hotel for the night. And thus we end day 20.